Revenge can sometimes be a double-edged sword. Handling it carelessly can cause the desired damage, but it can also cause harm to the person using it. In this case, we both suffered irreparable injury. In any case, no one gained anything from this except the lawyers. We both ended up looking like jerks, alienating most of the people around us. If I had it to do over again, I wouldn't have done what I did, but I probably wouldn't have married Jean either. However, it happened, and now we have to live with what we both did. As I said, no one came out a winner. I'm not even sure why I did it. That's what I told myself the second time it happened. I guess the facts are known. I just didn't have the common sense to stop it, and never in a million years did I think I'd get caught. But I did. Something about a text message that I never saw come, and that my wife accidentally read. After that, I was kind of screwed, so to speak. Ronda was just like, damn. I don't even know what to say except that there was something about Ronda that drew me to her. Tall, slender, smart, with incredible sensuality about her. Her skin was chocolate brown and her black hair was cut short. She wasn't what I would call a true beauty, but she had an aura around her that drew me in hypnotically. She was the editor assigned to me by Anderson and Davis, which published my children's books. She was going to edit my book chapter by chapter as I completed them. Ronda was chosen because she conveniently lived in the same state and contacted me once a month to pick up my new work and review what she had completed with me. You might think, listening to me ramble on about how I had a shitty marriage and was sexually unsatisfied in my marriage, quite the opposite. I loved my wife, Jean, and I had a beautiful daughter, April, whom I adored. How could I be so stupid? My wife and I were married for a little over 4.5 years. She works for Connor and Edwards, a large accounting firm based in Atlanta. She started working there the year she graduated from college and planned to spend 5 years with them. We met the same year we both graduated from college at a Barnes & Noble bookstore. She is an avid reader who always seemed to have a book in her hands. I graduated with a degree in English literature and studied books on teaching. We stood in the same long checkout line, got to talking, and that evening we had our first date. She was dating the hottie, as she called Dennis, but she didn't like the way he treated or talked to her. It didn't take me long to win her over. I treated her like a queen, and soon Dennis was history. If I had to describe Jean, I could probably sum it up by saying that she was very pretty. She was not stunning, but, as they say, she was pleasant to the touch. She was 168 cm tall, had dark brown hair cut short, had brown eyes and a pleasant figure. She was 34 years old, had a thin waist, and beautiful breasts. Jean was very smart and understood numbers. She was not boring and dull like most accountants I knew, but she was energetic and full of life. What in the world could make me cheat on her? I wish I could say I had an affair with her and she fell head over heels in love with me, but that didn't happen. We started dating and she just took over. She was the one who insisted on dating and then 6 months later asked where we were going with our relationship. I thought it was a match made in heaven. We were so alike, or so I thought. Steve, I think we should rent a place together. This is how the conversation began one evening. I love you, you love me, and damn, we spend almost every free moment outside of work together. We could probably save a ton of money by moving in together. She was right about that. Why don't we get married? Long story short, I proposed, and she accepted. She had tons of friends and hosted 3 wedding receptions and 2 bachelorette parties. Her new friends at work threw her a small bachelorette party, but the girls she grew up with and went to school with threw her a huge party at one of the local watering holes. Don't wait for me because I know I'll be late, she said, trying on her outfit. Maybe I should pick you up. What about if you're too drunk to drive? Anne is driving today, and the girls told me that we will have fun until the sun comes up. And so they did. I finally fell asleep just after 12, and when I woke up at 4 o'clock, she still wasn't home. I got up at 7 to go to the toilet and found Jean half-dressed on the bed next to me. She didn't move until 2 o'clock in the afternoon. Are you alive? I asked when she finally stood up. I'm not sure, but I think so, she moaned. You must have had a great time by the looks of you. She raised her head slightly and told me not to speak so loudly. and then rushed to the bathroom, where she vomited for a long time. 2 days later, she was almost the same again. 3 weeks later, we held a small ceremony with about 50 people in attendance, mostly close friends and family. Even though we did this before we got married, I think she tried to fuck me to death in the first couple of weeks after we got married and throughout our honeymoon. I wasn't at all surprised when she turned out to be pregnant, although she was probably already pregnant. A week before our wedding, I found an empty test kit box in the trash. But there was no test stick. After all, condoms weren't 100% reliable. Was I angry? Hell no. I was beaming at the prospect of becoming a father. Like any good dad-to-be, I attended prenatal classes with John and was in the delivery room when April was born. She was the kind of person every parent dreams of. She slept all night, hardly ever cried, and was almost never fussy. I read to her every night from the first day we brought her home from the hospital. I didn't care that she couldn't understand a word I said. It just brought me closer to her. Jean didn't object when I took charge of night feedings or when I changed her dirty diapers, but she drew the line when I tried to help with breastfeeding. I found that playing with her other breast while she was feeding April didn't help at all. We did this a couple times a week almost until April was born. Even though our sex was pretty vanilla most of the time, every now and then Jean would let me go a little crazy, especially after she'd had a few drinks. After 2 glasses of wine, being blindfolded or having our hands tied to the headboard suited her just fine, and more than a few hot outfits kept our sex life fresh. When I told her I was thinking about writing a children's book, she was completely supportive. Even though I spent hours on the computer for months, she continued to encourage me. Finally, after many months, I finished my book, The Man in the Tree. Jean read it and said she liked it. I, on the other hand, thought it should be considered for publication. Pretty soon I realized that I was not Hemingway. Microsoft Word didn't even catch a third of my mistakes. Most of them were so egregious that I felt like an idiot after I sent the book to the publisher and asked them to at least correct the spelling and grammatical errors. I paid 2 of my smartest high school kids $50 each to check it at least twice. I resubmitted the book, and, to my surprise, they said that with more work it would be good enough to publish. What did they mean by extra work? That's when I was introduced to Ronda. Thank God it didn't cost me anything because Ronda must have spent a month redoing this or that in my story. I thought it sounded good before, but after she was done with it, it was great. It was a short book and I didn't make a hell of a lot of money from it, but it was a start. They said I had potential and were willing to work with me on my next 2 books. They constantly assigned Ronda to edit my material. This is how my fall began. How is the story going? My wife asked me one evening at dinner. Okay, I guess, but it's much more difficult and slower than last time. I just hope there was more than just 1 book in me. You know, that wouldn't be the end of the world either, would it? You work hard all day at school and deserve some rest, don't you think? My wife truly was a gem. Well, if you're not too tired, how about we have a little fun tonight? Maybe I can give you a few things to write about, she said as she began to unbutton her top. It's a children's story, but on the other hand, maybe I'll write a story about a wife who seduces her husband and gives him a night of wild sex. I started chasing her around the kitchen table. Easy, Tiger, she said. Right now I need to get April ready for bed. Why don't you choose a short book to read to her tonight? I have a feeling we'll be doing a lot of research later for your next story. We had a great night of lovemaking. After kissing April goodnight and turning off the light, I found my wife lying on the bed. She was wearing something pink that covered almost nothing. 5 minutes later, it was on the floor and Jean was straddling my waist. I did my best to keep her straight as she rode me. For the first time in a long time, we did it twice. The first time was unbridled passion, and the second was tender love. When I asked if she was ready again, she just kissed me and said, "Not in your wildest dreams. You should be happy with what you have." You can't blame a guy for trying, I answered and fell asleep. When I was far enough along with my next story, I arranged to meet Ronda at my home shortly after 4 o'clock in the afternoon. My classes ended at 3, and I was usually home by 4. I prepared my first 3 chapters and went through them again to see if I saw any obvious errors. My big problem seemed to be that when I read my own work, I didn't read what was on the paper, but what I thought I had written. So much for the fact that I am my own editor. Ronda was at least 175 centimeters tall. She didn't have to stand on her toes in front of my 6'1" frame to look me straight in the eyes. We sat at the kitchen table, Ronda flipping through the pages, making notes. That's when I first started to notice, or better yet, study it. She wasn't bony, but she didn't have an ounce of excess fat. She had big brown eyes, decent breasts, and long legs. After thinking about it, I estimated that she was about 30, but one way or another, I could be mistaken by about 5 years. And then it dawned on me. It was the one thing that drove me crazy whenever we were together and ultimately doomed my marriage. It was her scent. I really noticed this during our second meeting. We were discussing a few changes she had made and were almost so close we could touch each other. It was warm, although not warm enough to sweat. I don't know if it was her perfume or something else, but she smelled wonderful. I found myself taking deep breaths every time she moved closer. What the hell could it be? The smell was sweet, but with a heavy, musky pungency. I almost asked what gave her that smell, but decided it was too personal a question. After watching the first 3 chapters, we skimmed through the next 4 before Ronda said she had to leave. "Your work is very new and refreshing," Ronda told me, and began putting everything into her briefcase. "However, you start repeating a certain word more than once in a paragraph. Use other words that may be acceptable. You're still new to this, and you still have a lot to learn, but you have a future if you can stick to my advice." I thanked her and escorted her to the exit. I sat at that damn table, taking deep breaths, inhaling what she left in my kitchen. When Jean returned home about 20 minutes later, she said the kitchen smelled bad. She then sprayed air freshener to get rid of the smell I was enjoying. This is how our monthly meetings went. By the 14th chapter, I raised the temperature in the house by 2 or 3 degrees. I always had a cold drink, but now I was lounging around in shorts, a t-shirt, and flip-flops. I also noticed that Ronda's clothes became more casual, also with shorts, sandals, and a light top. Finally, I had to ask, "What is this wonderful perfume that you use?" "Steve, I don't wear any perfume. For some reason, most perfumes don't smell very good on me." "Well, then, this must be your deodorant," I said with a slight laugh. Then she shocked me. "No, this cannot be either because I never use it. I hardly ever sweat and I hate clogging my pores with any chemicals." She smiled. "Well, Ronda, if you don't mind me saying it, you should bottle your scent because you always smell fantastic." I was going to say erotic, but I didn't want to be misunderstood. I didn't need a sexual harassment lawsuit, but she smiled. We sat next to each other for all 24 chapters and went from Diet Coke to glasses of wine during our proofreading sessions. I developed a great set of lungs as I continued to inhale her scent. It was when I started thinking about what it would taste like that I got into trouble. It all started with a casual hug and then a kiss on the cheek. When we finished my first draft, I told her I was inviting her to dinner, with my wife, of course. When Jean couldn't get a babysitter for the occasion, she told the 2 of us to go without her. "Are you sure, honey? Maybe we can take April to my parents or yours." "Don't be stupid. You 2 are probably going to talk business anyway, and a night alone in a hot tub is what I'm planning." We kissed, I changed, and Ronda and I headed out to dinner. I was the perfect gentleman throughout the evening until she asked me to dance. It was a slow song, and I was so excited you wouldn't believe it. I held her close, closed my eyes, and for the first time I didn't think about Jean. She held me tightly to her, and I almost lost my composure when she smiled and licked my ear. "It's a small advance, Stevie." She played with me. She moved one of her legs between mine, and now we were almost having sex on the dance floor. When she reached down and squeezed, I did everything I could think of not to shoot. I knew I was in trouble. We ended up in her room, and I finally got to try what I had been smelling for the last couple of months. I think I explored every square inch of her body as I brought her to climax at least twice. Then 2 more rounds, a long shower, and I was on my way home. You know, I didn't even think about what I had done until late the next day. I must have still had my head in the clouds, remembering every second I spent with her, and then I had a big crash. The text message about what a wonderful time she had only added to my shame. What the hell did I do? People were getting divorced because of what I did last night. I promised myself it would never happen again, but it did. School was closed for the Thanksgiving holiday week. Ronda asked if I had finished the last 2 chapters because her boss was trying to get them ready for publication just after the first of the year. I'm done with everything, but I haven't looked at the last chapters more than once. Okay, why don't I come over on Wednesday and we can finish the last 2 chapters, review the rest, and send them to the office from your house. This way, I'll get paid. You won't have to worry about it anymore, and you can rest easy. It sounded good to me. Luckily, she didn't mention what happened between us last time. At dinner, I told Jean the good news. After a week starting Wednesday, the book will be put aside. We'll have a great Thanksgiving and Christmas with a few extra dollars this year. I made a couple $1,000s as a base and extra if the book sold enough copies. I didn't want to get Jean's hopes up, so I just told her that the $5,000 I was going to get was all. We started just before 9 o'clock in the morning, and Ronda really tried hard for the first couple of hours. We made very few changes, and just before 2:30, everything was ready. "Steve, I need to use your bathroom," Ronda said, getting up from her seat and stretching. "It's down the hall to the right," I told her, feeling pretty good about finally finishing my book. I watched her walk down the hallway and started looking through the book again. I didn't even hear her come back. "I think it's time for us to celebrate, don't we?" I heard her say this behind me. I turned around and my jaw dropped. She didn't have any clothes on. I started to say, "Ronda, I can't do this." But she shut my mouth before I could say it all. She was completely ready to work me before I knew it, and I was kissing her furiously before my brain finally registered what was happening. Lips, tongues, fingers. It was all in play for the next few hours. Do you know what that smell is that you like so much? Well, since I hate driving, I spend those 2 hours playing erotic CDs and playing with myself. So, the smell you smelled on me was the smell of sex. I never realized I smelled so bad until I saw how crazy it drove you. I thought I would wear you like a second skin. You were so close to me. I was right about one thing. She tasted as sweet as she smelled. The second time, when she reached the finish line, she shouted, "No more!" We showered together, and after half an hour, she was ready to leave. We kissed at the door, and Ronda asked me to let her know when I started my next book. I washed my face again, sprayed the room with air freshener, and opened a few windows to ventilate the room. We exchanged a few messages back and forth, and I told her that our last time together would not happen again. I told her it was unforgettable, but that I loved my wife and didn't want to ruin my marriage any more than I already had. She said she understood. It was just after the first of this year. I was working in the garage when a text message arrived on my phone, which was lying on the kitchen table. Jean was preparing April's lunch when the beep sounded. Automatically, she picked up the phone, read the message, and in 1 New York minute, my life and marriage ended. Over the next 3 hours, there was so much screaming and sobbing that I never had time to catch my breath. I would like to say that I was politely asked to leave, but what actually happened was that, for my own safety, I packed a bag and went to the motel along with my cell phone, which ended my happy life. Just wondering if you have started your next book? I miss your golden tongue. I don't think my deepest place will ever be the same, was the message from Ronda that ended it all. I spent the next 2 months begging and crying, but to no avail. I was a bastard, a lying bastard, and Jean wanted nothing to do with me anymore. I asked to be given a second chance. I begged her to go to counseling. I begged and crawled on my knees, saying I would do anything, and I really meant anything, to get her back. Nothing helped. I was served. The reason was written in capital letters, adultery. I found a small apartment near the school where I worked. I figured I had 90 days to try to talk her out of it. Her father hired Jean, a good lawyer. Heck, he was a great lawyer compared to the one I had. It was my own damn fault that I screwed up so badly. I didn't even look at the documents. I tried everything under the sun to stop it and thought in my twisted mind that I still had a small chance. When Jean got the restraining order, because I kept showing up at our house at all hours of the day and night, I should have sorted out my life, but I didn't. I screwed up. I said I would change. I promised never to do it again. Jean didn't want any of this. I never want to see your lying face again. That's how she formulated it. I'm going to make it my life's mission to make your life hell. Can you hear me? She screamed at me during our last hearing. It was all over and I died inside that day. Even though we are a no-fault state, adultery and having a minor child played a big role in how this all happened. Everything was divided in half. She was allowed to stay in the house with April until April turned 18. I was ordered to pay her alimony, child support, medical benefits, housing payments, and have a life insurance policy that names April as the beneficiary. I was only supposed to receive supervised visits due to a restraining order. Jean kept her promise and did everything in her power to make my life hell. How could he do this to me of all people? Jean screamed to herself as she walked from room to room in what used to be their happy home. She thought her life with Steve was perfect, and then he went and ruined everything with some slut. Jean remembered planning her marriage after their first month of dating. Her boyfriend, Dennis, was a control freak, and Jean learned early on that she could never say no to him, no matter what he asked, and he knew it. With Steve's help, she was able to break free and vowed to never let a man take advantage of her again. Jean knew from the very beginning that Steve and she were made for each other. They had the same likes and dislikes. Jean poured every fiber of her soul into her marriage. She was so angry because he just threw it all away. Her dad and mom tried to convince her to give Steve another chance, and at one point she even considered it, and then she thought about Dennis. Jean allowed him to completely control her, and she was confident that if she gave in to Steve, she would give him the same power that she gave Dennis. She couldn't do this, or go through this again, no matter the cost. So Jean allowed her anger and hatred to rule her life. She decided that Steve would pay for putting her through this pain. She would do everything in her power to tear his life apart, like he had torn hers apart. In the end, our friends became her friends, who did not want to be associated with a cheater and adulterer. She contacted the school board and the school I worked at, all my friends, my family, and everyone I had ever met in my entire life, to tell them what a despicable person I was. By the time she was done with me, I was broken. When I started drinking, what else could I do? A little self-pity went a long way. I drank after work and spent most of the weekend at home. It got so bad that I couldn't function normally without a couple of drinks in the morning before work. I don't even remember my first Christmas after my divorce. I was supposed to spend it with my family, but I never got around to it. Thank God the holidays gave me a lot more time to mess up my life. I still managed to see April when I wasn't too drunk to drive or passed out on my bed. Jean told me to either do better or she wouldn't let me see April anymore. I didn't care. I was probably too busy to care. In 2.5 years, I went from a happy-go-lucky husband to a walking alcoholic, one warning away from losing my job and losing my teaching certificate. With the exception of my mother, my entire family wrote me off as a pathetic drunk. As she listened to my many tales of woe about how I had ruined my life, she tried to cheer me up by telling me that I was still alive and had a beautiful daughter to take care of. I know she meant well, but I took the last step over the cliff and just waited to land on the rocks below. Then, within 6 months, 2 important events occurred that radically changed my life. And for once, for the better. Like every Friday night since I can remember, I was drunk as usual. I started drinking right after work, and when they stopped serving me at one establishment, I headed to another. The inside of my car looked like a garbage dump. I was grabbing something on the seat when it happened. One moment I was driving straight along the road, and the next moment I realized that I was flying over an embankment and going down the hill into a ravine. Was I wearing a seatbelt? Heck, I didn't do it for ages, hoping to kill myself and spare myself my own misery. Well, anyway, I was floundering in the car when it finally stopped at a large oak tree. My whole body hit the windshield and steering wheel. The pain was what finally brought me to my senses. Everything hurts. I was bleeding from my face or head, it's unclear. It was still dark, but at least there was a moon in the sky. My power windows weren't working. Luckily, the window on my side was more than 3/4 down. When you eat little and mostly drink, you lose a lot of weight, which worked well for me in this case. It took me a long time to get my sorry ass out of that damn window, and in the process I realized that I was hurt in more than just a few places, and it felt like my entire body had been run over by a Mack truck. I crawled up the slope on all fours, and by the time I could see the road, it was already getting light. I tried to stand up, realizing that my left leg was one of my problem areas. I continued to trudge towards the road. I have no idea how long I lay there before I see the first car. I raised my hand, but he drove by. "Bastard!" I shouted, pressing even further into the road. The next car almost hit me, but swerved at the last minute to avoid hitting me. At the moment, I have nothing left. "Just do it, fucking hit me, you son of a bitch," I thought as I watched the next pair of headlights approaching down the road. They must have stopped, or at least called someone to get my mangled ass out of the way. I saw the light, heard voices, and lost consciousness. I don't remember anything that happened after that. The next thing I remember is people didn't start hurting me while I was trying to fight them off. Then everything became quiet again. It seems to me that I died. "Mr. Moore, can you hear me?" I heard a voice say that it would bring me back from heaven. The light in my eyes made me shake my head from side to side before I realized that my hands and feet were tied. "Why the hell am I tied up?" I shouted, tugging at the belts. "It's for this reason," the man in the white suit told me. "Calm down and I'll take them off, or keep it up and I'll leave you here with them. Your choice." I stopped resisting. "That's better," he said, untying my hands. "Take it easy. Your left leg is badly bruised and you'll have to walk with a cane for a while." Now, with both eyes open, I looked around. I was in a hospital room somewhere, and the worst part about it all was that I was completely sober. "Doc, can you give me something for the pain?" "Not now, but very soon. To answer your next question, you are in the hospital, and it is Sunday morning. We called the number in your wallet. Your mother will be here soon. Some woman named Jean hung up last night, but not before giving me her number." "Fucking bitch," I said under my breath. "You could have killed someone," my mother shouted at me as soon as she entered my room. "How many times have I told you not to drink or drive?" I just shook my head because I've heard it all before. "I'm over it. Can you hear me? I wash my hands of you and your life. Kill yourself if you have to, but please don't take anyone with you. If you want, I'll ask your father to leave his shotgun in your apartment. At least do it in the bathtub so it will be easier to clean up later." She looked at me again and left. "Wow, that was cold," the doctor said. Good advice, but still cold. He left too. I was discharged the same day. Cuts, bruises, a sprained knee, and a few stitches are what I ended up with, despite my best efforts. I caught a taxi home and hobbled up to my apartment on the second floor. They gave me several painkillers, and I washed down the first two with a sip of vodka. Sitting at the kitchen table, I looked around my humble home. What a pigsty. It was as if someone had taken everything I owned, put it in a box, shook it, and threw it back on the floor. What does this mean? When you hit rock bottom, you can only rise up. Well, I've finally achieved it. And in record time, I might add. The next week was tough. And I'm not even talking about my physical injuries, which were starting to heal. I received no sympathy from anyone, including my students. The drunkard got what he deserved, was the general opinion. The worst part was that I was sober, and the world didn't look so rosy. I couldn't stay home because I spent my entire weekend dealing with my hangover. So if I wanted to get paid, I had to work. Hell, if I missed one more time, I'd be fired. So I got up, got dressed, took a taxi to work, and a taxi home. I could forget about asking anyone for a ride. I was still a worthless drunk and a cheater, and most of the other teachers wanted nothing to do with me. Hell is the only way to describe the next month. The human body is not designed to endure such suffering, and I had neither the time nor the money to go to rehab. I suffered 24 hours a day, or at least when I was awake. The whole time Jean rode my ass, because the only way I could get to April was by taxi, and my family still didn't want anything to do with me anymore. I struggled with this alone. On the bright side, I no longer had supervised visits. April was a child and was used to me staying away for too long. When she told me some of the things her mother said about me, I cringed. The worst part about all of this is that most of what she said was true. No matter what, I tried to see her once every 2 weeks. Jean was out of town, and it was my weekend to spend with April. She said she dropped April off at her parents' house, and I could pick her up from there. "Try to stay sober for once," were her last words to me. I had a good relationship with her parents, Connie and David, right down to Ronda, and they didn't blame their daughter for divorcing me. The only harsh words David ever said were when he said he was disappointed in me. He thought I had a stronger moral character. It hurt more than any scream. I was busy and called David to say I would be an hour or so late. Still as sweet as he always was, David said, "Steve, why don't I give April a ride to your house and save us both a lot of trouble?" "Thank you, David. I would appreciate it if it's not too intrusive." "No problem. We'll just meet you at the entrance in, say, 20 minutes? I was on the sidewalk when I saw their car turn right onto my street. I was very confused when they drove right past me, but I caught a glimpse of Connie grabbing the steering wheel. Their car crashed into 2 other cars on the right side of the street before crashing into a taxi, waiting to pay its fare. I dialed 911 and was running to the car before I even heard the crash. Paramedics were on scene in less than 5 minutes. I went to the hospital in one of 2 ambulances. David suffered a heart attack, and Connie had a broken arm and several ribs. April punctured her spleen and needed surgery to repair the damage. I told the doctor to take as much blood from me as he needed for my little girl. As soon as I got to the hospital, I called Jean and told her what happened. I gave her the news hour by hour until she arrived later that evening. When the doctor came out and said April was fine and out of danger, I felt incredibly relieved. I said that if she needed more blood, I still had 2 quarts. "Mr. Moore, we couldn't use your blood because she's not right for April," he said, looking at me. Okay, that didn't make any sense. "What do you mean it doesn't fit?" He dragged me into his office. "Mr. Moore, have you ever done a DNA test?" I got even more confused. Why the hell would I need a DNA test? Is there something wrong with my blood? He said something about positive and negative rhesus, but I didn't understand what he was talking about. "It's not easy to say," he said, looking at me. "Are you by any chance April's stepfather, or did you adopt her?" He continued to ask. "No, April is my child. I am her father. Just to be 100% sure, I need to do it." He took out a cotton swab and ran it along the inside of my mouth. "What was this for?" "I'll take the same swab from April and do a DNA comparison between the 2 of you. Mr. Moore, I could be wrong, but I don't think you are April's biological father. In about 5 days, I will have the test results to confirm if what I suspect is true." I left the room and went to check on April before heading out the hospital doors. That night I cried and then became angry and furious. These 5 days were hell. Every day after work, I would stop by to see how April was doing. She was expected to be discharged by the end of the week. I even made it a point to stop by to see Jean's father, David. "If you had your damn license, none of this would have happened." Jean snapped at me as I entered David's room to see him before leaving the hospital. "You make me sick, you fucking loser!" She screamed at me while her father told her to hold back. "Why should I? If he hadn't cheated on me, we wouldn't be where we are now." There was still no forgiveness in her voice. I told David that I hope he feels better and gets better soon. I turned to leave. I couldn't leave the room fast enough to escape Jean's vicious vitriol. 5 days later, I was in the hospital looking at a piece of paper that would change my life for both the better and the worse. April was sleeping when I entered her room. I didn't bother her, but before leaving, I kissed her on the forehead. "What the hell do you want?" was the greeting I received from Jean when I entered David's room. "I thought you would be here," I said, handing her a copy of what I was holding. "What the hell is this?" "This, my dear Jean, is the hand of God." "Steve, what the hell are you talking about?" Let me explain it in a way that even your corny little mind can understand. This made her even angrier, but this time she shut up. This paper shows that I am not April's biological father, you fucking tramp, I said, raising my voice at the last part. Who is April's father, Jean? Or don't you even know for sure? Steve, there must have been some mistake, David said. No mistake. The doctor did a DNA test on both of us. When were you going to tell me that April wasn't mine? And did you ever even consider doing this? This doesn't prove anything. You're still a fucking cheater, she spat back at me. Now look who is so righteous here. So what? The fact that you're not April's father? Who the hell cares? You were never a good father to her anyway. Jin, shut your damn mouth for a change, okay? David shouted at his daughter. David, if I were you, I would stay away from this because it will get ugly very quickly. Jean, knowing that you cheated on me and forced me to raise someone else's child, you could forgive me for my betrayal. And, since we were even, you could try to save our marriage. Or if you just divorced me and left everything as is, I would be unhappy, but I could live with it. But you've done everything in the world to make my life hell, and now I'm going to get my pound back, even if it takes every penny I can earn, borrow, or steal. You'll dread the day you see me, you know, slut. I think she was starting to get the picture. What do they say in your church? Has the Lord spoken my vengeance? Well, the wrath of God is going to come down on your ass, and I'm going to enjoy every fucking minute of it. Steve, I need to explain, Jean stammered. Leave it alone. You'll have more than enough chances by the time I'm done with you. I smiled for the first time in years. Steve, don't do this. Think about April, David said. I turned to him, shrugged, and said, You should talk to someone who cares, because I don't care. With these words, I limped out of his room, this time with my head held high. By the time I got into the taxi, my self-esteem had grown. I found the meanest fucking lawyer money can buy. I think he would have sold his sister to a brothel if he thought it would help him win his case. By the time I finished telling him my story, he was salivating. Well, do I have a case against my ex? Steve, first question, how far do you want to go with this? I don't understand, I answered. It's a simple question. How far do you want to go in this matter? It won't be nice if you tie my hands later. I want her to pay and suffer the same way she made me suffer for the last 2.5 years. That's all I wanted to hear. You know it will cost you dearly, but I will make sure you get back every last penny. It seemed like he was also going to make sure he got his money no matter who won or suffered. We talked for another hour. He gave me a list of things to pack for him, and I left there, at least for a while. 2 weeks were enough to put everything on paper. I think he was as excited about the case as I was. The first thing we need to get is an annulment of your marriage. April was born just over 8.5 months after you got married. In other words, Jean was pregnant with another guy's child when you two got married. The DNA report, your affidavit that you used protection while having sex with Jean, April's birth certificate, and your signed marriage license are all nails in her coffin, so to speak. I have already sent the papers to the church in which you were married and to the head of the local archdiocese. With the amount of evidence we have, there's no way they'll turn us down. How long do you think this will take? If I insist on this issue, it will probably be a little more than a month. This usually takes 3 to 6 months. Jean's parents still attended that church, and everything would probably have come to light before it was final. My skin became even thicker. Then where do we go next? If there was no marriage, then there can be no divorce. We're going to collect from her the alimony you paid her, child support, and the house, because it's still essentially half yours. After we annul the marriage, if I were you, I would return to the house, especially since you are making the payments. When can we start all this? I became more and more horny. As soon as you sign these papers, everything will start moving. I signed with a big smile on my face. My lawyer continued. I forgot to mention. I accuse Jean of fraud and seek from April's real father a refund of your expenses for her care since birth. FYI, I'm guessing her ex-boyfriend Dennis is our logical choice, but I asked her to report the father if it's not him. I found out that Dennis is now married, so I think his new wife will not be happy with him when he is ordered to give a DNA sample. Anything else you want? Nothing that I can think of right now, but I'll probably think of a couple of things in the next week or so. I think you covered the basics. Steve, this is what you pay me for. Steve, what the hell are you doing? Asked the distraught Jean. I told her she could talk to my lawyer before hanging up. She called twice more, and both times I hung up. Then my mother attacked me. Steve, I just got off the phone with David and Connie. Are you trying to annul your marriage? What kind of marriage? Jean was pregnant with someone else's child when she tricked me into marrying her. April is not mine. I guess I'm not the only asshole here. And besides, why do you care? Aren't you the one who said you don't want anything to do with me anymore? Steve, honey, it used to be when you were drinking all the time. And don't forget when I was a cheating bastard. Let's not remember this now, my mother asked. I cheated on Jean. I apologized. I begged her to forgive me. She sent me and did everything in her power to make my life a living hell. And you, my precious mother, took her side. Now it turns out that Jean wasn't as fluffy as everyone thought. She was a fucking slut who put someone else's baby on me and let me think he was mine all these years. Am I angry? Hell yes. So please stay out of my life and let me ruin it myself if I want. I hung up. Damn, that was nice. There had never been an annulment in the diocese before, but even the bishop could not dispute the facts. Jean lied and went into marriage fully aware that the child she was carrying was not mine. He recommended to the cardinal that this be granted, and a little over a month later the Catholic Church declared my marriage null and void, which meant that in the eyes of God the marriage never happened. Steve, with this out of the way, we can move on to step 2, which is to undo your divorce and make you whole again. Robert, no matter how this ends, I will never be whole again. I was sure of it. With all the documentation, a lawsuit was filed in court to cancel the divorce, terminate and return her alimony and child support, and also to recover compensation from the biological father for all the years of financial support that I provided to April. I also accused Jean of deliberately committing marriage fraud. Things were about to get ugly again, but this time I wasn't such an emotional cripple as I was last time. I was happy that Jean chose the same lawyer she used last time. I also needed to settle scores with him. Robert and I were having drinks after everything was filed in court. Steve, you seem like a good guy who got taken for a ride and humiliated last time. But if you go through this, you'll probably hate yourself in the future. Now I hate myself, so what's the matter? I cheated, admitted it, and paid the price 10 times as much. That bitch wife knew April wasn't mine. And if she had just come clean at that point, we probably could have worked things out. I'm not saying it would have been easy, but the way I felt at the time, I would forgive anything to get her back. Do you know what it's like to have everything 1 minute and nothing the next? I drank to numb the pain, but no matter how much I drank, it was still there. So now I'm sober, and the pain is still there, and it's time to make it go away. It might cost me everything to get rid of this, but I can't continue like this. Does this make any sense to you? I guess in a weird way it happens, but you know you can never undo it once it starts. I knew it, but it was much better than my father's shotgun. He can't be serious. Look at all these charges, John shouted to her lawyer. Her father looked over her shoulder at the legal document his distraught daughter held in her shaking hands. I hate to say it, but he has a very strong case, and he will probably win. Have you tried talking to him about this? Well, you know, reason with him? He just says to talk to his lawyer and keeps hanging up. I can't believe he's so vindictive. I can, her father spoke. You did everything you could to destroy him, almost cutting off his reproductive organs. And you probably would have done it if you could. That bastard cheated on me, she screamed. What the hell did you do with him? You got pregnant and gave him someone else's child to raise. What the hell do you think he was going to do when he found out? He's going to come at you with everything and try to execute you the same way you executed him. But this time, you have more to lose than him. Last time, you were a poor little hurt wife and mother. This time, you will be the devious, cheating slut. Jean, listen to your father. He knows what he's talking about, the lawyer supported David. I might lose, but he'll never see April again. Never. Can you hear me? she shouted at the two of them. How will it hurt him? April is not his biological child. But April loves him to death. He is the only father she has ever known. Jean, you were wrong before, and you are wrong now. You just can't see it through all your hatred. The cancellation of the divorce was inevitable. With the annulment of the marriage, there was no divorce. Alimony was immediately canceled. With the DNA report, my child support was suspended, and I was given back the title to my own home. The next couple of things got a little more challenging. I was unable to collect child support from Jean, but her ex-boyfriend Dennis was tested and was proven to be April's biological father. He was unhappy about this, as was his wife. Dennis said he had no idea he had gotten Jean pregnant. He told the court it happened on the night of her hen party. She was drunk, he was drunk, and although he didn't quite remember what happened, they must have done it in the back seat of his car. Jean swore and called Dennis a bastard in open court. She was told that one more outburst and she would be prosecuted for contempt of court. Dennis was ordered to pay full compensation to me and child support for April. Fraudulent marriage was not easy to prove. This could mean prison time for Jean if she were convicted. When the judge asked to meet in his office, I wasn't sure what to expect. Look, we are all adults here. Steve, up to this point you've gotten everything you wanted. Why don't we drop this last charge and close this case? Because of April, there is no way I will allow Jean to serve actual prison time, even if she is found guilty, he said, looking at everyone. I whispered something to my lawyer. We are ready to drop this charge under certain conditions, said my lawyer. All Jean has to do is call everyone she's spoken ill of about my client and tell them that she cheated on him, got pregnant, and passed off someone else's child as his. That's all we ask in addition to Steve returning to his home. I'd rather rot in hell than do this, Jean screamed at me as her lawyer tried to calm her down. Well, Your Honor, then I see no other choice but to continue with the charges. Jean was seething and tearing me apart piece by piece with her eyes. It's Thursday. I think we all need to cool down a little. We will meet here again on Tuesday morning at 9 o'clock. I hope all parties use this time to work out a fair compromise. Otherwise, I will be forced to act, and I don't think anyone will benefit from my final decision. However, until that time, I do not want Mr. Moore to return to his former residence. Is it clear? I nodded. Jean smiled for the first time. With these words, we filed out of his office. We'll go back to our list of compromises, my lawyer told Jean's lawyer. However, if she's not willing to give in, we're going to go for the maximum penalty. And I don't think either of us wants that. That day, Robert and I made our list of demands. I want her to call my 12 ex-friends and 3 administrators at my school, I told him. I also want to see April every other weekend. It won't be easy after everything that happened. I still care about her, even though I hate her mother. She will try to block it, and we may have to bring in a child psychologist to prove to the court the strength of the bond you two have formed. Until recently, you were the only father she's ever known, and I don't think Dennis will go out of his way to mend his relationship with her. He was right about that. And anyway, why do you want to go back to the house? I guess for no other reason than to piss Jean off, but at the moment I think I just want it to go away. Please note that the house must be sold and the proceeds divided in half, even though I have been making payments on it for the past 2.5 years. Thus, it will show that I am inferior in some way. It was almost everything I wanted. Robert emailed these suggestions to Jean's lawyer, and I spent the weekend relaxing, healing, and doing both sober. It was about 2 o'clock on Monday morning, and I should have been asleep by now. I've been lying on my bed for the last 2 hours or so, staring at my laptop. More than once in the last 2 years, I had thought about throwing it into oblivion, but I was usually too drunk to stand, let alone do any harm to anyone but myself. If I had never started writing books, I would never have met Ronda, and would never have cheated, I told myself over and over again. But sober, in the dark, I knew that this was not entirely true. I did it because I could. She never forced herself on me. My own weakness voluntarily led me to the slaughter. Jean was everything I ever wanted, and forgetting what she did to April, she was a great wife and mother. If it weren't for that accident and my presence there, I would never have known about April, and none of this would have happened. I had no one to blame but myself. Both books were still selling, and all royalties were deposited into my escrow account. I still owed them another book on my contract, but I hadn't heard from them in over a year, after we had a couple of drunken conversations. I lifted the lid of my Apple laptop, turned it on, and looked at the backlit keyboard. I typed for about 2 to 3 hours before stopping. I showered, shaved, caught a taxi, and went to work. Give up everything except selling the house, and so I can see April. Tell them they can stay there until it's sold and I'll still pay the mortgage. Are you sure about this? I just want this to end. I don't have the strength for this anymore. I didn't show up in court on Tuesday. The last charge was dropped. The judge made his final decision. The case was closed. My family tried to call, but I wasn't quite ready to receive them. Through my lawyer, Jean sent me a message thanking me for finally being human. I think it was her way of saying, thank you. I never answered. I bought a Chevrolet 10 years ago. When the house was sold, I bought a small apartment, and for once, life began to go well again. Jean allowed me to see April every week, and I spent the next 6 months trying to repair the damage I had done to our relationship. It hasn't been easy, and we're not quite there yet, but at least I'm trying. I stay busy and drink too much coffee, or so my dentist tells me. One night, out of the blue, Ronda texted me saying she was sorry. I simply replied that I did too, and left everything as it was. But I stayed busy. It was the only way I could heal. It was just after 6 when Jean returned home from work. It was a terrible day, and all she wanted to do was take off her shoes and relax. She waved to her neighbor as she walked down the driveway to the mailbox, wondering what new bill she'd find there today. It was full, not with bills or junk mail, but with a large brown bag with something hard inside that took up about 75% of the empty space. With no return address in sight, Jean tucked it under her arm and continued going through the rest of her mail, slowly walking back toward the house. She threw everything on the counter, went to the refrigerator, and pulled out a bottle of cold white wine. After pouring a glass, she sat down at the bar and put her feet on one of the other chairs. After taking a sip or two of wine, she continued looking through her mail. Trash, 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 legislation, and political advertising. That's all. Grabbing the package, she searched again for an address before pulling the nylon tab to open it. She was leaning against the counter when April burst through the front door, asking when dinner would be ready. Jean didn't hear her then, or when April came over and tugged at her dress, asking her mom what she was doing. She could see little wet spots on what her mother was reading and looked up to see her mother crying. Tears streamed down her cheeks and dripped onto the pages from her chin and the tip of her nose. "Mom, are you okay?" April asked. More than worried. John didn't say anything to her for another couple of minutes. John looked up from what she was reading, wiped away the remaining tears, and hugged her daughter. "You know I love you," she said, kissing her on the cheek. "Mom, you got lipstick on me," April said, hugging her back. "And you know your dad loves you too, right?" She nodded and asked again what was for dinner. "Go wash up and then set the table while I heat up what we ate last night," Jean said, taking a long sip of wine and taking the remains of last night's dinner out of the refrigerator. She must have looked back at the book on the counter a dozen times before dinner was ready and while they were both eating. Jean remained silent, only half listening to April's non-stop chatter. Some TV, a quick bath, and since she had school tomorrow, April was in bed by 8 o'clock. Jean took the book from the counter, changed into her old pajamas, and, after drinking another glass of wine, turned on the bedside lamp. Placing 2 extra pillows under her head and 1 under her knees, she continued reading. As before, tears stained the pages, and she had to stop reading several times to wipe her eyes. She had to take several deep breaths each time before she could continue. It took another 4 hours and a total of 3 glasses of wine before she finished reading. She made a mental note to call in sick after she put April on the school bus tomorrow morning. With the light still on, she finally dozed off. And if April hadn't made so much noise, Jean would probably have slept for a couple more hours. April was already dressed and jumping on her mother's bed, asking about breakfast, when she noticed a book on the bed next to her mother. "What is this?" she asked, picking it up. "Just a book." "I want bacon and eggs, toast and jelly," April said, snuggling close to Jean's tired body. 35 minutes later, she ate and walked out the door, waving back to her mother. With a cup of coffee, Jean headed back to her bedroom. "Carol, I won't be able to come this morning. I'm not feeling too well. I think I'll just spend the day in bed." "See you tomorrow," she said, hanging up. After putting the cup of coffee on the night table, she took it back and read the cover to herself. Nobody wins. On the inside cover, it was written, "This book is dedicated to the wonderful family I once had and lost." This brought another tear to her eye as she read the first paragraph again. "This was no one's fault, but my own. Maybe if I had been a better person, I wouldn't have done what I did. I had it all. A loving wife, a daughter who thought very well of me, and a match made in heaven. But then I threw it all away because I was a weak and stupid person. I'm much stronger now, but I'm typing all alone on this damn keyboard, hopping to touch at least one man so that he doesn't make the same mistake I did. It all started with my book, The Man in the Tree. I suppose if I hadn't written it, I might still be married, but I was married and I'm not married now. As soon as I met her, I knew she was someone special, and after our first date, we would be together forever." She read it again, this time without crying so much, and agreed with the author. Nobody won. Subscribe to our channel so that your second chaff doesn't cheat on you, and go ahead and listen to the next story, because this story is nothing compared to the next one. If you're under 18, don't even think about listening to the next one.